I'm Joy. Standing in the church hall, I watched as my father, Mr. Thompson, raised a glass of sweet tea. The band had just stopped, and the ice in someone's glass was still clinking. He tapped the glass with a butter knife, and the room fell silent, the kind of silence that a story that would be told for years. With a smile on his face, he looked past me and addressed the 40 people gathered to celebrate his retirement. I want to say something while I have everyone here, he said, his voice amplified by the microphone. I'm officially disowning our eldest daughter. She's brought shame to this family. Don't contact her for us. My in-laws froze, their plates half raised. My 7-year-old daughter, Mia, in her pink dress, looked up at me, trying to understand a sentence no child should ever have to hear. Little did those 40 people know what I'd find in my grandmother's hatbox 3 days later and what my husband, Jake, an Air Force pilot, would do when he returned from his mission. To understand how I ended up in this situation, we have to go back to the spring when my grandmother, Mrs. Green, started to show signs of dementia. I've been a nurse for 10 years, mostly working night shifts. You learn a lot on the night shift. You learn that the same hands can welcome a new life and hold someone's hand as they leave this world. You learn to keep calm because panic spreads faster than any disease. My grandmother was the only one in my family who truly appreciated my work. While others introduced me as the one who married a pilot and moved to the suburbs, she would hold my face in her hands and say my name with love. That spring, she was 84. First, she started forgetting names, then she'd lose the thread of a conversation. One Tuesday, she called me ma'am and asked if I'd come to read the meter. I drove the 15 minutes to her house twice that week just to sit with her. I started keeping notes, just like I do at work, dates, symptoms, what she ate, what scared her. My mother, Mrs. Thompson, thought I was overreacting. My sister, Sarah, said Grandma was just getting old and I should relax. But I'd seen this before on the ward. I knew where this was going. What I didn't know was that someone in my family had already started down a different, and very wrong, path. My family seemed perfect from the outside. My father was the manager of the local branch of First National Bank for 30 years. In our town of 3,500 people, that made him almost like a local celebrity. He'd lent money to many businesses on Main Street and quietly foreclosed on a few, which only added to his reputation. My mother was the chairperson of the local community garden committee. She remembered everyone's birthday and always made sure to bring a delicious dish to every gathering. Sarah was the beautiful one who married well and opened a flower shop called Blossom Haven on Elm Street. And then there was me, the nurse, who left for nursing school, married a pilot, and worked hours that meant I often missed family dinners. When I brought up my grandmother's care, the conversations always went sideways. Who would manage her doctors, her money, her house? Every question I asked was met with a pat on the arm and a change of subject. I told myself they were just grieving in advance. One evening, while I was folding Mia's clothes, my phone rang. The screen showed Sunnydale Memory Care, a place I didn't even know my family was considering. I hadn't been involved in the decision-making at all. When I answered, a kind voice asked if I was the granddaughter who'd be handling visits because I was the only one on the list. Jake was 9,000 miles away when all this started. He was in the middle of a 6-month mission, and the calls were sporadic and often dropped. We'd been married for 9 years. He knew my family well enough to know they were generally nice but could be strict at times. That night, when I caught him on a video call, his face pixelated with a desert-colored wall behind him, I told him about my grandmother being in memory care and that I was the only one signing in. I also mentioned that my parents were keeping me away from anything related to her money. He was quiet for a moment, the way he gets before he says something important. Document everything, Joy, he said. Dates, names, every cent. Not because you're paranoid, but because memory fails, and not just grandma's. I laughed it off, saying we weren't in a war zone. But he didn't laugh. Paper holds up, he said. The call dropped, and I sat there in the blue light of the frozen screen. I didn't take any notes that night. I thought documenting my family was a betrayal, as if I'd already decided they were guilty. The next morning, I drove to Sunnydale Memory Care. I signed the visitor log in my neat handwriting and held my grandmother's hand as she told me a story about a puppy she'd had as a child. Little did I know that this simple visitor log would one day be more important than any words my father could say. The first time I heard the rumor was at the pharmacy. Mrs. Jenkins, who taught me Sunday school, touched my arm. "Honey, we all understand. People get busy, but your grandmother does ask for you." I stood there, holding a box of children's cough syrup, trying to make sense of her words. "Mrs. Jenkins, I visit Grandma 3 times a week," I said. Her face showed confusion. She didn't finish her sentence, paid for her things, and left. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. I drove home slowly, replaying the conversation in my head. Who would spread such a rumor? And why? At a red light, I opened my phone and scrolled through the family group chat. There were no messages where I'd said I couldn't visit. There were just gaps where my messages used to get replies. By the time I got home, I'd talked myself into believing it was just small-town gossip. It wasn't worth a fight, especially with Jake away and Mia needing a stable parent at home. 2 weeks later, I went to Sunnydale for a Saturday visit. The front desk was short-staffed, so they asked me to sign the paper log myself. The binder was open to the current month, and I saw that my name was written down like a regular schedule: Saturday, Tuesday, Thursday. Next to my mother's name, there was a single visit for 15 minutes on a day she'd posted about spending time with Grandma on social media. Sarah hadn't come at all. I asked the nurse gently if there was a second log. "No, dear," she said. "You're our most frequent visitor." I took a photo of the page, telling myself it was just for my peace of mind. Then I went to sit with my grandmother, who was having a clear moment. She squeezed my fingers and said, "You're the only one who comes, Joy." That sentence echoed in my mind on the drive home. After that, I noticed I'd been removed from the family group chat. Sarah forgot to invite me to her friend's party and acted hurt when I mentioned it. My mother started answering my calls on speakerphone, which meant others were listening. Every conversation felt like an interrogation, and I was always the topic. I started over explaining, sending long texts to my mother about how often I visited my grandmother. I'd lie awake at night, rehearsing my innocence. I told myself I was keeping the peace for Mia's sake, so she could still have a normal family life. But looking back, I realize it was just a way to avoid conflict. One night, my mother called on speakerphone again. I finally asked, "Mom, why do people keep saying I abandoned Grandma?" There was a pause, and then she said in a voice I'd heard her use with difficult relatives, "We just want to keep this family together, Joy." She hung up before I could answer. I sat there, holding the dead phone, thinking about what she'd said. It sounded more like a threat than a hope. I also started to notice something about the money. Memory care is expensive. Sunnydale cost $6,500 a month. Years ago, my great-grandfather had set up a family trust, which was supposed to cover my grandmother's expenses. My father always said, in his bank manager voice, "Don't worry about the money. That's what the trust is for." One afternoon at Sunnydale, I asked the billing office if the trust was covering everything. The woman pulled up the account and nodded. "Paid in full every month, on time, by the trustee," she said. I asked who the trustee was, and she said, "Mr. Thompson." It made sense, he was her son and a bank manager. I drove home feeling reassured, but in hindsight, it was the first sign of trouble. A few weeks later, I made the mistake of bringing up the trust statements in front of my father. We were at my parents' house for one of the rare Sunday dinners I was still invited to. My grandmother had had a fall at Sunnydale, and it worried me. I said I wanted to keep better track of her care, including the financial aspect. My father put down his fork patiently, like he was explaining a complex financial concept to a child. Joy, you handle the medical. Let me handle the money. That's my area. I said I wasn't trying to take over, just to see the statements like any family member should be able to. The atmosphere at the table turned cold. My mother suddenly found the flowers on the table very interesting, and Sarah laughed nervously and said, "Why do you always have to make things so complicated?" My father's jaw tightened for a second before his banker's smile returned. The trust is private. Grandma's still alive, and I'm the trustee. There's nothing for you to see. Legally, he was right. I knew I had no standing to demand anything while my grandmother was alive and he held the role. So, I went home and wrote down the date, the conversation, and his exact words in a notebook I'd started keeping. Jake's voice was in my head, paper holds up. I still didn't know where this was leading, but I'd started building a case. The next clue came from Sarah's flower shop. Mia had a friend whose older sister was buying flowers from Blossom Haven, and I drove there to drop off a gift the bride's mother had left at my place by mistake. I hadn't been to the shop in over a year. It used to be bright and full of color, but now the windows were a bit dirty, and some of the flower arrangements looked wilted. As I stood there, a delivery man rolled up in his truck. He climbed out and asked if I knew when the shop would pay its bills. Flowers, vases, delivery fees. It's been 80 days, he said tiredly. I told him I was just dropping off a gift, and he sighed and got back in his truck. Then Sarah came out. When she saw me holding the delivery notice, her whole demeanor changed. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. I held up the gift basket as a peace offering. She took it, blocked the door, and said, "We're fine. We're renovating." She practically pushed me to my car. On the way home, I thought about two things: Sarah's business was in trouble, and someone was keeping it afloat. I just didn't know whose money was being used. I was looking forward to Jake coming home that summer. His mission was almost over, and we'd planned a trip to the beach. But then I got an email saying his leave was postponed due to operational reasons. I read it twice in the school pickup line and forced a smile when Mia got in the car. That night, when we talked on the phone, I told him about Blossom Haven and the trust. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You already know what's bothering you. You just don't want to say it. A failing business doesn't stay open by itself, and money that's supposed to be locked up isn't if it's leaking somewhere." He told me to wait until I could legally see the trust records and to keep documenting everything in the meantime. I told him I hated that he was probably right. He smiled, the tired smile of a man who missed his family. "My mission's almost over. Worst case scenario, I miss the beach, but I'll be home for your dad's retirement party." I'd almost forgotten about the party. It was a big deal in our town, a celebration of a man everyone trusted with their money. One Wednesday in late May, my grandmother had a moment of clarity. I went to see her expecting the usual confusion, but she was sitting up, her eyes clear. She asked for a cup of tea with a splash of lemon, just like she used to. She recognized me right away, knew the year, and asked about Mia. For an hour, I had my grandmother back. Then, near the end of the hour, her face changed. She grabbed my hand tightly and whispered, "Joy, listen to me. When the time comes, check the hat box in my closet, the red one, before your father clears it out. Promise me." I promised and asked what was in it. But the fog was already returning. "What's mine to give?" "What he's been taking," she said, and then she was gone again. I sat with her until visiting hours ended. On the drive home, those words haunted me. I didn't know what she meant, but I knew I had to keep my promise. 11 days later, my grandmother passed away at 2:37 in the morning. I was the only one there because I was the only name on the emergency contact list. I'd been on a night shift, so I was already in my scrubs. I drove through the empty streets to be with her in her last moments. I called my parents at 3 a. My father answered on the second ring, fully awake. I told him she was gone. The first thing he said was, "All right, we'll need to do this properly. The service has to be perfect. People will be watching." He didn't ask how she was or if I was with her. I stood there in the quiet room, holding my grandmother's cold hand, and listened to him plan the funeral as if it was a business deal. I said I'd let him handle the arrangements. Then I sat back down beside my grandmother and made a different promise. I promised to open the hat box before he cleared the house. I knew there was more to this than just grief. The funeral was beautiful, just like my father always made things. It was flawless but cold, like a perfect painting with no emotion. The whole town came. My father gave a eulogy about duty and family that made people wipe their eyes. But I sat in the second row, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt. Sarah wouldn't look at me. She kept whispering to my father, and they both glanced at me a couple of times. My mother held my hand at the graveside, but it felt like a performance. The relatives, aunts, and cousins, kept their distance, as if I had something contagious. At the reception in the church hall, my Aunt Lucy cornered me by the punch bowl. She'd had a couple of glasses of wine, and her sympathy had an edge to it. "I just hope you can live with yourself after what you did with her things," she said, patting my arm. I asked her what she meant. "Her jewelry, Joy," she whispered, scandalized. "Taking it while she was still alive. Your own grandmother." I felt the floor tilt again. The rumor had grown from neglect to theft, and it was spreading just as my grandmother's trust was about to change hands. I didn't defend myself there. I just put down my cup, found Mia, and went home. But I started keeping a more detailed record of my family's actions. The next morning, I went to my grandmother's house. I still had the key she'd given me years ago. The house smelled like her perfume and freshly baked cookies. It broke my heart to be there, but I had a promise to keep. I went straight to her closet and found the red hat box. It was soft at the corners and tied with a faded ribbon. I sat on the edge of her bed and opened it. On top were old photographs, my grandmother as a young woman, my father as a boy, and me as a toddler. Under the photos was a small silver key with a paper tag that read, "Safe Deposit, Citibank," a different bank from my father's. And under the key was a letter folded in thirds with my name on it in my grandmother's shaky handwriting. I read the letter 3 times. "My dear Joy," it began. "You were the only one who came. I'm not so far gone that I don't know it. There's something I'm too tired to fix, so I'm leaving it to you, the only one I trust. Your father has been taking money from the trust for years. I let it go for a long time, thinking a son helping himself wasn't stealing, but it got out of hand. When I tried to ask, he said I was confused. Maybe I am some days, but not about this. I've changed things. The lawyer has the details. When I'm gone, you're the one I named to look after what's left. Be careful. He won't like it. Love, your grandmother." I sat there for a long time. The words in that letter were like a bomb going off in my life. She wasn't confused, she'd been silenced by a son who controlled both the money and the story. That same week, I received 2 envelopes. The first was an embossed invitation to my father's retirement gala at the church hall. The whole town was invited, a grand show of his 30-year career. The second envelope had gone to Jake's parents separately. They'd been invited too. It didn't make sense at first. My grandmother had just died, and the town was full of rumors about me being a thief. Why would my father invite me and my in-laws to his biggest night? Unless the party wasn't just a celebration. I was part of the plan. I called Jake and told him about the envelopes, the letter, and the safe deposit key. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Don't open the safe deposit box yet. Don't show your hand. And whatever happens at that party, Joy, keep your